In the year 1400, Europe was a disaster. It was poor, fragmented, and completely overshadowed by the massive empires of the East. While they had order, Europe had chaos, and that was its greatest advantage. Most people think gold or gunpowder built the modern world, but the real engine was something much quieter: transaction costs. While giant empires enforced order from the top down, Europe's constant infighting forced merchants and kings to solve one problem: how to make trust cheaper and trade faster. Every broken promise was a cost. Every new rule was a victory against friction. Today, we're exploring how this hidden erosion of barriers turned a collection of jealous princes into a global economic powerhouse. We're breaking down the 5 secret innovations that turned friction into an engine of growth. Let's dive in. Now, imagine you're a merchant in the year 1400. You want to sell silk from Venice to a buyer in Bruges. You don't know them, they don't know you, and there is no global police force to stop them from stealing your cargo. In the East, you'd need an emperor's blessing. But in Europe, you needed something else entirely. The first advantage was credible trust. It wasn't created by a single decree, but by hundreds of small cities competing for your business. In traditional societies, trade was personal. You trusted your cousin, your guild brother, or someone of your same faith. If you were an outsider, you were a target. You had to earn trust from scratch, and that was expensive. Europe's fractured map pushed us in a different direction. From the 12th century on, cities like Genoa and Antwerp realized that to get rich, they had to protect strangers. They built commercial courts where a foreign merchant could sue a local resident and actually win. This was a revolution. Law, not lineage, decided disputes. Out of this grew the law merchant, a shared code of conduct used from London to Venice. You no longer needed a cousin in every port, you just needed paperwork that stood up in court. While empires like the Ottomans or the Ming dynasty favored insiders with imperial licenses, Europe's rivalry made reputation portable. If you defaulted on a debt in one port, the news followed you. This led to the birth of corporations and limited liability, tools that let you take huge risks without losing your life. By 1600, a European merchant could move goods through 6 different countries using the same recognizable paperwork. In contrast, a caravan crossing Persia had to renegotiate its life every time it hit a new checkpoint. Trust had moved from the person to the procedure. But cheaper trust was only half the battle. To truly dominate, these merchants needed a way to move goods across a continent that was trying to tax them at every turn. They had to turn deadly distance into a competitive edge. The second advantage was market expansion. In the early Middle Ages, moving grain just 100 kilometers could double its price. Tolls, thieves, and bad roads made distance a death sentence for profit. But as rivalry heated up, states realized they could win by being the easiest to pass through. They built the arteries of modern trade, the Rhine, the Po, and the Great Dutch canals. Cities began to specialize like pieces of a machine. Bruges handled textiles. Lubeck handled timber. Italian cities became the world's bank. Look at the Hanseatic League, over 200 cities working together to standardize weights, coins, and insurance. Suddenly, a merchant in Hamburg knew exactly what his prices meant in Riga. Information started moving faster than the goods themselves. While large empires kept supply chains domestic to protect tax revenue, Europe's borders became bargaining chips. If one port raised taxes, merchants just moved to the next one. This competition forced tariffs down and postal systems up. By 1600, a price shock in Paris would hit Amsterdam in days. Geography wasn't a wall anymore, it was a landscape to be played. This was the birth of the division of labor. The Dutch shipped, the English wove, and the Germans forged. The friction was gone, and the modern world was beginning to move. The third advantage was institutional innovation, tools that didn't just move money, but spread risk. Think about the danger of 15th century trade. Pirates, storms, and corrupt officials. Europe's answer? The Bill of Exchange. Merchants stopped carrying heavy chests of gold and started carrying paper. You could pay in Florence and collect in Bruges, making theft almost a non-issue. Then came the bourse. In Amsterdam, prices became public. No more relying on rumors. You could see the value of sugar or silk in real time. This transparency meant anyone could spot an opportunity, not just the king's inner circle. But the real game changer was the corporation. Before the Dutch East India Company in 1602, if a venture failed, you lost everything. But with limited liability, you could invest a small amount without risking your home. In the Ottoman or Mughal empires, big trade still depended on royal favors. In China, it was tied to your clan. But in Europe, risk was being democratized. It could be priced, insured, and shared by thousands of small investors. This wasn't just a way to trade, it was a way to fund the future. But all these contracts and stocks were useless if you didn't have the right information. In a world of slow horses and wooden ships, the person who knew the truth first won. And Europe was about to break the speed limit of knowledge. The fourth advantage was informational efficiency. On YouTube, we call this low latency. In the 1600s, it was the difference between a fortune and a funeral. Before the printing press, knowledge was a secret guarded by elites. But as presses spread across Europe's fractured states, they created a grey zone that censors couldn't fully control. If your book was banned in Paris, you simply printed it in Amsterdam and smuggled it back in. Merchants began receiving printed price currents, the 17th century version of a Bloomberg terminal. Knowing the price of wool in Bristol while standing in Lisbon gave you an immediate edge. It killed guesswork and it killed fraud. This open source culture leaked into science too. Journals and patent registries meant people were building on each other's ideas rather than reinventing the wheel in secret. While the Qing state in China or the sultans in Istanbul kept a tight lid on information to maintain order, Europe's rival postal networks, like the famous Thurn and taxis, were racing to deliver letters in days instead of months. The fifth advantage was the ultimate payoff: technological acceleration. In a high-friction world, you have to be self-sufficient because you can't rely on others. But as transaction costs fell, Europe's regions started to act like different organs in a single body. England had coal, but needed grain. The Netherlands had no raw materials, but had the best ships and banks. Suddenly, they could swap. Italy focused on precision design, Germany on heavy tools. This is the pin factory logic Adam Smith made famous, and it only works if you have the contract law and postal routes to back it up. This created a perpetual motion machine. Specialization gave workshops a reason to invent better tools. Better tools made trade even cheaper. Between 1500 and 1800, Europe's output tripled. No empire in history had ever seen growth like this. By the time the steam engine arrived, the groundwork was already laid. The Industrial Revolution didn't just run on coal, it ran on centuries of falling friction. While Europe looked like chaos on the surface, it was accidentally building the most efficient system for human exchange the world had ever seen. But this isn't just history. Digital technology is the ultimate transaction cost machine. When you use an app to buy a stock or check a seller's rating online, you are using the 21st century version of the Amsterdam Bourse and the law merchant. Instant payments, cloud data, and reputation systems are doing exactly what those old postal routes did. They are attacking the waste in every deal. Economic leaps don't start with a single invention. They happen when it becomes safe enough, cheap enough, and fast enough for millions of people to take a risk together. Europe didn't win because it was smarter. It won because it learned how to make trust the cheapest commodity on the market. To bring it all together, Europe's rise was built on 5 quiet revolutions. Legal competition, which turned trust from a personal favor into a legal guarantee. Market expansion, which turned closed borders into open opportunities. Financial tools, which democratized credit so anyone could take a risk. Information systems, which killed uncertainty with the speed of a printing press. And specialization, which turned that efficiency into the explosion of the Industrial Revolution. Thank you for joining this exploration on Curiosity Matters. Subscribe for more in-depth journeys into the mechanics of progress, where systems, incentives, and human creativity meet. Stay curious,